the still of the night, a voice echoed through the darkness, not from the living, but from a father long gone. What he revealed would uncover a truth too horrifying to ignore. Welcome to Eerie Road Tales, where we bring you chilling stories rooted in truth. Stories that blur the line between the known and the unknown. Tonight, we unravel a haunting tale of a father's restless spirit and his desperate warning to save his daughter from an unspeakable fate. If you love spine-chilling true stories, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more. Let's dive into this eerie tale. Our story begins in 2005 on a quiet stretch of farmland, miles away from the nearest town. It was a place where the silence stretched for hours, interrupted only by the rustle of trees or the distant sound of animals in the fields. This was where Tennille, a young mother grieving the recent loss of her father, decided to start anew. With her husband, her 1-year-old daughter, and her younger sister, Tennille moved into the farmhouse her father had left behind. For them, it was more than just a home. It was a connection to the man they had loved and lost. A place to hold onto his memory. But life on the farm wasn't as peaceful as it seemed. The house itself was unremarkable, a modest structure weathered by years of storms and sunlight. Yet, from the moment they arrived, Tennille couldn't shake a feeling she couldn't explain. It wasn't loud or overwhelming, but it was there, persistent. A presence. The first signs were small, easy to dismiss. A shadow passing too quickly in the corner of her eye. The creak of floorboards in the middle of the night, when everyone else was asleep. At times, it felt as though the house was listening, watching them as they went about their lives. Tennille told herself it was her imagination, a trick of her grief. Her husband was the first to voice his unease. Late at night, he would wake Tennille, his voice low, filled with hesitation. "There's something in your sister's room," he whispered. Each time, she brushed him off. "It's just the old man," she'd say, referring to her father. She tried to believe it, but the look in her husband's eyes suggested he wasn't convinced. Days turned into weeks, and the strange occurrences continued. It wasn't just the shadows anymore. It was the feeling of being watched when no one else was in the room. The sound of muffled voices when the house should have been silent. Tennille began to wonder if her husband was right. If there really was something or someone occupying the house with them. If you're already feeling the chills, don't forget to share this video with someone who loves a good ghost story. They'll thank you later. And remember, there's much more to this tale, so stay with us. It started subtly, almost quietly, as though it didn't want to be noticed. Tennille's husband was the first to bring it up. Night after night, he would wake her from a deep sleep. His voice was hushed, uneasy. "There's a man's voice in your sister's room," he said. At first, Tennille dismissed it, still half asleep, her thoughts muddled by exhaustion. "It's just the old man," she replied without thinking, the words slipping out before she could process them. But as she lay there, the weight of those words began to settle. Deep down, she knew whose voice her husband was hearing, her father's. The same voice she had heard countless times during her life, now faint but familiar, seemingly reaching out from a place she couldn't understand. As the nights passed, her husband's urgency grew. The whispers weren't going away. He insisted they were real, but Tennille clung to the hope that grief was simply playing tricks on them. After all, grief does strange things. It makes shadows seem alive, turns silence into whispers, and makes the ordinary feel uncomfortably strange. Yet, the occurrences refused to fade. The voice became clearer. It wasn't just a fleeting sound. It lingered, almost as though it were calling out for attention. Tennille tried to convince herself it was her imagination. But the nights stretched longer, and the tension in their home thickened. She began to notice things she hadn't before: the faint sound of footsteps in the hallway, the way her daughter's cries would sometimes stop abruptly, as though soothed by an unseen hand. One night, she woke not to her husband's voice, but to silence, an eerie, unnatural silence that seemed to fill the entire house. She sat up, her heart pounding, listening for any sign of movement. Then, faintly, she heard it. The voice. Her father's voice, calling her name. To kneel, it said, the tone unmistakable, filled with urgency. Her chest tightened, her breath quickened, and for a moment, she froze, caught between disbelief and terror. As the days went on, the voice didn't stop. It came at odd times, sometimes in the middle of the night, other times during the quiet moments of the day, when she thought she was alone. And it wasn't just calling her name anymore, it was saying something, though she couldn't always make out the words. The tone was pleading, insistent, as though it was trying to warn her of something. Tennille began to feel a strange mix of emotions: fear, confusion, and a sense of guilt she couldn't quite explain. Was her father's voice truly trying to communicate with her? Or was her grief manifesting in a way she couldn't control? The uncertainty gnawed at her, even as she tried to keep the strange occurrences to herself. Her husband noticed the change in her, the way her hands trembled slightly when she thought no one was looking, the way she jumped at small sounds, her eyes darting toward empty corners of the room. She felt like she was unraveling, caught between the living and the dead, unsure of what to believe. One evening, as she sat in the dimly lit living room, her sister walked in, her expression distant. "Were you calling me just now?" her sister asked. Tennille shook her head, her stomach twisting. The realization hit her. She wasn't the only one hearing the voice. But why? Why was the voice there? And why was it reaching out now, after so much time had passed since her father's death? The questions haunted her, but the answers remained elusive. And the voice didn't stop. What would you do if you heard the voice of a loved one after they passed? Tell us in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts. It was a quiet evening, much like any other. Tennille stood in the kitchen, her hands busy peeling potatoes. The rhythmic sound of the knife against the cutting board echoed softly, blending into the stillness of the house. For a moment, it felt almost normal, almost peaceful. But then, without warning, the air in the room seemed to change. It was subtle at first, a faint chill creeping along her skin, the kind that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand on end. She stopped, the knife hovering above the potato, and listened. The kitchen was silent, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator. But then, she heard it. A voice, clear and unmistakable. Her father's voice, as familiar as her own heartbeat. "Tennille," it said, firm and filled with urgency. She froze, her breath caught in her throat. And then came the words that would haunt her forever. "Something is wrong with your sister." Her entire body tensed as the weight of those words sank in. Her mind raced, trying to rationalize what she had just heard. But the voice lingered in the room, as real as the walls around her. The knife slipped from her hand, clattering onto the counter, and before she could stop herself, a scream tore from her throat, a raw, primal sound that seemed to echo through every corner of the house. Her husband and sister rushed into the kitchen, their faces pale, their eyes wide with confusion and fear. But Tennille couldn't speak, couldn't explain what had just happened. All she could do was stand there, trembling, as the lingering presence of her father's voice seemed to envelop the room. The days that followed were filled with an unshakable unease. Tennille couldn't ignore the feeling that her father's spirit was trying to tell her something, something she wasn't ready or willing, to face. The shadows in the house seemed to grow darker, more defined, moving in ways that defied explanation. It wasn't just the shadows. The air felt heavy, almost oppressive, as though the very walls of the house were watching, waiting. And then there were the reflections. Tennille began to see him, not directly, but in fleeting moments. In the mirror above the bathroom sink, in the glass of the window as she stood in the living room. Her father's reflection, stepping out of the doorway to his old room, his face etched with an expression she couldn't decipher. Her sister, too, began to notice the strange occurrences. Doors would creak open when no one was near them. The faint sound of footsteps would echo through the hallways at odd hours, growing louder, closer, but never revealing their source. Tennille felt the tension in the house rising, as though the very fabric of their lives was being stretched to its breaking point. Each time she saw his reflection, it felt like he was trying to tell her something, his presence a silent but insistent plea. And though her fear was overwhelming, a part of her knew deep down that she couldn't keep ignoring it. Whatever was happening, it wasn't going to stop until she faced the truth her father was desperately trying to reveal. If this story has you hooked, make sure you're subscribed to Eerie Road Tales. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next haunting tale, because this one is far from over. The tension in the house had grown unbearable, each unexplained event adding to the weight pressing down on Tennille. The shadows, the whispers, the persistent presence of her father's voice. It all led to a moment she could no longer avoid. Sitting at the kitchen table late one evening, Tennille decided it was time to confront her sister. The house was quiet, the only sound the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Tennille's sister sat across from her, her eyes tired and wary. Tennille hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to begin, but the words spilled out before she could stop them. "I need to know," she said softly. "Is something happening to you?" Her sister looked up, startled, her expression quickly turning guarded. For a moment, it seemed she wouldn't answer. But then, as though a dam had broken, the words came tumbling out. She spoke in fragments at first, her voice trembling, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Slowly, the pieces of the puzzle began to take shape. Her sister revealed that she had been living with a secret too heavy to bear, a secret she had kept hidden out of fear and shame. She had been the victim of assault, a trauma that she had buried deep, hoping it would disappear if she didn't speak of it. Tennille listened, her heart breaking with every word, and suddenly, everything made sense. The voice, the reflections, the strange occurrences, it was all connected. Her father's restless spirit had known. He had seen what she could not, and he had refused to stay silent. His love for his daughters was stronger than the boundaries of life and death, and he had done what any father would. He had tried to protect her. As her sister spoke, Tennille felt a wave of emotion wash over her: grief, anger, love, and a deep, unshakable sense of connection to the man they had lost. Her father had always been their protector in life, a steadfast presence who would do anything for his family. And now, even in death, he had found a way to fulfill that role. The knowledge brought a strange sense of comfort amidst the sorrow. Though her father's body was gone, his spirit remained, a guardian watching over them from a place beyond comprehension. The house no longer felt ominous to Tennille. Instead, it felt like a place where love lingered, unbroken by time or death. She began to see the signs differently. The shadows that flickered in the hallways were no longer something to fear. They were a reminder of her father's presence. The whispers in the night weren't unsettling. They were a testament to his unwavering care. Even the reflections in the mirror felt less like intrusions and more like quiet reassurances that he was still there, keeping watch. For Tennille and her sister, the experience changed their understanding of love and loss. It was a reminder that some bonds cannot be broken, not even by death. Their father's legacy wasn't just in the memories he left behind or the land he had given them. It was in his enduring love, a love so powerful it reached across the veil to protect them when they needed him most. If this story moved you, share it with someone who might need to hear about the unbreakable bond between a parent and their child. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to Eerie Road Tales for more stories that remind us of the mysteries that lie just beyond our understanding. This story goes far beyond the realm of a simple haunting. It speaks to something deeper, something profoundly human. At its core, this is a story about love, an unyielding, unbreakable love that defies the boundaries of life and death. A father's instinct to protect his child is one of the most powerful forces in existence. And in this case, that instinct reached beyond the grave. Was this a supernatural intervention, a father's spirit refusing to rest until his family was safe? Or was it the manifestation of a bond so deeply rooted in love that even death could not sever it? It's a question we may never fully answer, but perhaps that's the beauty of stories like these. They remind us that some connections transcend the physical world, existing in a space where logic and emotion intertwine. Stories like this, one, remind us of the thin veil separating our world from whatever lies beyond. It's a veil that is sometimes pierced by acts of love, devotion, and even desperation. In many cultures and traditions, there are tales of spirits returning not to harm, but to guide, protect, or warn their loved ones of danger. We've heard of mothers who appear to their children in dreams, warning them of impending accidents, or fathers who show up at the exact moment their loved ones need them most, despite having passed years earlier. These stories are universal, crossing borders and beliefs, and they remind us of the mysteries that surround us every day. So, what do you think? Was this truly a father's spirit returning from beyond to protect his daughter, or could it have been something else entirely? We'd love to hear your thoughts, theories, or even your own experiences with the unknown. Share them in the comments below. Your stories inspire us and our community. If you enjoyed this chilling tale, don't forget to hit the like button. It lets us know you want more stories like this and helps others discover our channel. And while you're at it, subscribe to Eerie Road Tales for weekly explorations of the mysterious, the unexplained, and the downright terrifying. Don't forget to share this video with your fellow horror enthusiasts. It helps us bring more tales to life and means the world to us. And always remember, sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that could happen to you. Until next time, tread carefully, because the road to the unknown is never far away. Good night and stay safe.